Hello and welcome to Gabbett Media. I'm Grant Abbott and today we're looking at a simple method or workflow for creating characters in 2D. This is meant for beginners or those that are relatively new to the process within digital art. I'm using Krita, a free digital art program, and it's version 4.3, but this will still apply to any drawing program, and it's about the workflow, not the tools. It's a nice easy approach and the simplest for learning and producing any object quickly in my opinion. And it's a great starting point for those that are new to digital art and want to make simple finished pieces that work reasonably well. Now this video is part of a series about digital art, so I'll be going through in more detail the more technical aspects of the programs in other videos. And this is a brief overview for those interested in how to make simple characters, or any object for that matter, ready to show clients or as 3D reference images or go into your games as characters and so on. And you can see the results with this Beachman character here. Now if you're completely new to digital drawing, then check out my digital drawing for noobs link in the description. If you like what I do and the way I teach, then check out my Learning to Draw Creating Game Art course, available now, and you can get a discount with the link in the description. So I'm going to show you how I made this simple Beachman. Now the first stage of any workflow is to grab some reference images and get some ideas. And I really like the site Pinterest for doing that because you can grab images and put them all onto one board. I also use a program called PureRef, and that's where I like to grab and put lots of reference images, and you can kind of organize them and put them into different areas and have that on a second screen if you've got that available. The next stage is to do some thumbnails. So here are my really rubbish thumbnails, but I really wanted to show you how rough and rubbish they could be. So this one here, for example, it's just kind of using circles and triangles to try and get an idea of the proportions that I wanted. Then there's this one, which is just using simple circles and ovals to go a little bit further in proportions. Then we've got these two here and here, which I'm taking it a tiny bit further, drawing a bit of an outline, getting a rough idea, but these should take hardly any time at all. If you're a more proficient artist, then you'll have a bit more accuracy than me perhaps. But the point of this is you're experimenting with shapes and experimenting with composition. And I've done very little experimentation in this series of thumbnails. And I would suggest this is quite an important stage, so you probably want to spend a lot more time and do a lot more thumbnails than I have here. And with thumbnails, I recommend not erasing or deleting anything if you can get away with it, unless it's really distracting in some way and your image needs a bit of a tidy up. But it's always useful to see that progression, and you can always go back to a stage or back to an idea you had earlier. And generally thumbnails kind of build up into something a bit more special each time, particularly if you're a beginner doing thumbnails, you're kind of experimenting with techniques and ideas. The next stage is to then sketch out. Now if you want to know how to do sketches like this, then check out my digital drawing course, but I'll give you a very quick overview. For me it entails blocking out, so I get the big areas and I slowly put them into kind of 3D shapes such as this. I put action lines on them, or look lines as I call them, to show the way they're facing, slowly building up, and sometimes just lines and squares. So you can see how this model would start off. And from there it's a case of blocking in with the shapes, as you can see there. Again, I don't erase too much at this stage, unless it becomes distracting. So you can see in areas like this, I've done a bit of erasing because there was lines overlapping and they were detracting from the image. But all these kind of rough lines in here, they're absolutely fine, and they kind of guide you and help you to get the shape after lots of brush strokes. So once I've got a general shape like this and I'm relatively pleased with it, I would then do a cleaner sketch over the top. So it's a good idea to do this on a new layer, otherwise you're trying to delete and erase the lines and clean up later on. So I can just hide the original artwork and come out with something like this. Now the anatomy is not amazing with this. It is a simplistic character, and this again is meant to show a nice quick workflow. So once you've got those basic lines in, we're ready for the base color layer. Now it's worth pointing out that my background layer, if you have a look here, is actually a grey color. If I press Ctrl and left click, you can see it's not completely white as it usually starts out as. I've made it slightly grey. That's really helpful when it comes to shading, but I also find it useful when it comes to just general colouring of your objects. White can be really distracting, so change your background to a slight grey tone. That's going to be better for you. So the base colour, that's on a layer underneath my second line layer, which is up the top there. And you can see it's nice and simple. I've given his swimming trunks a really garish green line at the top and pink and red. I just thought that'd be kind of fun. Now it still looks fairly plain and boring, so we can add in some shading. And that's my dark layer here. So you can see the difference that makes. All that is, if I click on the dark layer and put the opacity all the way up, I've drawn in some black lines over the top of my color layer. So if I hide the color layer, you can see it there, and then in the background there. I then change it to a multiply blend mode. Now this isn't absolutely necessary, but it's quite good because it uses the colors from the layer underneath and then sort of multiplies them and makes them darker. So a multiply blending mode is really useful for that. Again, you don't have to have that. You can have normal and then just bring the opacity down, and that works as well. But if we look at multiply, it's not particularly influential on this particular model because there's not a lot of color to it. But with more colorful objects, then you'll see a big difference. So again, you don't have to do it, but it actually takes influence from the colors below. So there's the multiply effect. I draw it in completely black like this, and just wherever I think there should be some shadow. It's a good idea to think about where your light position is coming from at this point, and then I just reduce it down in terms of the opacity, depending on how harsh I want the sun or whatever lights there are in the scene to be. So that's the shadow layer. Then there's a light or highlights layer. So once again, it's got an opacity setting on it, so I just draw in white lines where I think there's a bit of glare, and it looks really oily at the moment. And then you can just reduce the opacity down, depending on how much shininess you want on his skin or not. And this time I've used the blending mode Screen, which is a lightening mode. Much like multiply in its darkening mode, it actually is influenced by the colors underneath slightly. So it's a nice one to use. If I change this across to normal, you can see very little difference in this particular case, but for other objects you might notice it has more influence. And it's just a matter of drawing in completely white and then increasing or decreasing the opacity of that layer. The next layers are kind of fun, and they just kind of finish it off. They're called rim lights. So there's the first rim light. It's like a red glow from the side. So if I turn that on and off, it's like we've got a light shining as if it's coming from the back here. And they're really good fun for making things stand out from the background and just pop in some way. So it's like they've got some special lighting on them. And you can see how simple that is. It's just going around the edge, and I drew completely red as if it was a red light, and then I can reduce or increase the opacity. Again, I'm using that screen mode, and you can increase the intensity of it or decrease it with that opacity slider. The next one, I did a blue rim light on the other side. So you can see that there. Again, if we really intensify it, there's a light coming from the other side this time from the back. And I actually missed it out on this arm here, so I could actually draw some in that might sort of be hitting this area in here perhaps. So you just go around the outline there where it might be hitting. And then we can increase or decrease the opacity as we see fit, probably somewhere around there. So those are the two rim light layers, and you can see the influence that they have. There's the first one and then the second one. And they're great for making it pop out of the background. And I've used red and blue colors, but you could use any colors in this case for different types of mood. So the last thing is just the ground shadow to attach them to the ground. And I just got an airbrush and quickly sketched in some shade on the floor. It's quite important that to anchor your characters to the floor, it just gives them a bit more structure. And there we have it, a nice simple character workflow. That particular coloring technique is what I think is the simplest way to quickly add shape, form and shade to your objects. And it's quite a nice fun result. The more complicated, in my opinion, is the original sketch, which in this case took by far the most time. And in many ways that's probably where you want to spend most of your time, because any mistakes there will always be shown through in the finished piece. So that's my simplest workflow for creating especially 2D characters, but any 2D object in general. Hopefully this will help you if you're a beginner out there trying to figure out simple and easy workflows. Comment below with any thoughts you might have or questions. Thanks for your support, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.